So the Dhamma for today is called the Brahmavihara, a popular, well-known and commonly practiced set of teachings. Brahmavihara, Brahma means something like holy or supreme. Of course, in India, Brahma referred to the gods, the beings that were divine but beyond the ordinary sensually attracted angels. So a Brahma is a being that is born without any corporeal body, in a state of great peace, bliss, and longevity, similar to what we know of as gods or God in Western religions. They're not gods, but they dwell in great peace, and so the idea of naming these states or these practices after Brahmas makes a lot of sense. It also makes sense because these practices in and of themselves don't lead to enlightenment. They in fact lead to the Brahma worlds. However, in Buddhism, the explanation of the word Brahma is often more towards holy, or as an abbreviation of Brahmacharya, meaning the holy life. So these are the way that someone who truly leads the holy life lives. Vihara meaning dwelling or living as a way of life. So anyway, we can think of these as a staple for religious life of any kind, whether you're Buddhist or not Buddhist. A person who doesn't practice, incorporate, and cultivate and exhibit these qualities is not truly living the holy life and has deficiencies as a result. The four Brahmaviharas are metta, friendliness, kindness; karuna, compassion; mudita, appreciation, altruistic joy, appreciation for other people's good qualities; and upekkha, equanimity. Four practices that are directed towards beings. So these aren't the kind of practice that we undertake in mindfulness and in vipassana, where our focus is on ultimate realities, experiences, moments of seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting or feeling or thinking. The object of these practices are people. You have kindness towards a person, you have compassion towards a person, you have appreciation towards an individual being. And equanimity here refers specifically only to equanimity towards beings. And I'll explain how that works. So it's important, there's quite a bit to discuss about these four, more than you might think. They aren't quite as simple as just undertaking them in terms of how you think of them on your own. It's first important to understand how they succeed, how they fail, what they are for, what they are not for, what they are and what they aren't. And understanding them in terms of their nature as a beneficial practice. So for example, metta, friendliness, what it is the practice of wishing well for others or aspiring for the well-being of others, that other people should attain good things. When you wish for someone to be happy, as a very simple practice, may all beings be happy. This is a practice of metta, or kindness, friendliness. What it isn't is partiality, where you wish for certain people to have good things and others you're not interested, or you might even be averse to them gaining the same things. Wishing them for your dear friends, wishing for other people to have good things because of who they are, not simply as a practice of tranquility of mind or peace of mind for you as an individual. So when we practice metta, we try to avoid practicing it towards only towards those who we love. We try to find people who in fact we dislike as a practice. And of course there are different practices, practical ways of approaching this. But ultimately the idea is to cultivate kindness universally towards all beings, or have that capacity where there are no limits on your kindness. The enemy of kindness, there are the two enemies. So the near enemy is this partiality, where you wish for only those, where you apply it towards people as a sort of a yearning. Like a mother might wish for their children to be happy and be upset when they aren't happy, for example. But the far enemy, the enemy which we are confronting with the practice of kindness, is of course ill will. So the reason for practicing metta would be to free yourself from anger towards others, ill will towards others. And the thing that you would try to confront or overpower with the power of metta is ill will. So here we have, what is it for? It's for cultivating goodwill towards others. It's for overcoming its enemy, which is ill will. And what we have to watch out for is called the near enemy, which is where you become partial towards others. So try and apply it and understand it as being applied universally. Those are the three aspects. For karuna is, you could say, the other side of the coin, or the opposite of metta, in the sense that karuna wishes for beings to be free from suffering. It's an equally wholesome and beneficial quality of mind. However, it works on the opposite side of things, concerned about suffering, seeing people in suffering and wishing for them to be free from suffering, doing your best to try and alleviate the suffering of others, in terms of supplying medicine and physical care, and then of course in terms of providing spiritual care, helping people to free themselves from depression and anxiety and all sorts of mental illness, wishing for them to practice mindfulness and practice vipassana to be able to let go of those things. What it's meant to combat, its far enemy, or the true enemy of compassion, is cruelty, the wish to inflict suffering on others. So with metta, it's more about denying other people good things. With karuna, it's about wishing good things, wishing bad things for them. This would be the enemy. So when we have cruelty, wanting other people to suffer, wanting to harm other people, people who have anger issues, who lash out at others with speech or with actions that are harmful. And the close enemy, and this one is important, is sadness. So it's quite common for people who wish to or apply themselves to cultivate karuna or compassion, end up being sad and upset when other people suffer, when they think about the suffering of others and they feel sad. And so this is the near enemy. This is the danger of practicing compassion. As you practice compassion, you have to always be aware, always be mindful that you're not allowing sadness to arise. And your desire to alleviate suffering from others, again, it can't be out of a sense of desire or yearning, such that when it fails or when it hasn't yet succeeded, you feel sad and upset at the suffering of others. In this way, you could say that mindfulness is quite helpful for the practice, and I'll talk about how that is later, or the importance of that later, but just to remark that during the time you're practicing any of these, if the near enemy should arise, or even the far enemy, you can undertake the practice of mindfulness to sort of alleviate that before you return to the practice. So for example, when you feel sad, you can note the sadness before going back to the practice of karuna. The third, mudita, is the appreciation of good states that people already have. So this deals with the idea of jealousy, or aversion towards the good deeds, the good experiences that other people have. Sometimes feeling belittled or feeling jealous, obviously, feeling sad that you don't have these things. When you appreciate these things in others, it opens up your heart and frees you from this shrunken state of feeling aversion, actually, at the good things that others have gotten, allowing you to free yourself from biases and judgments and enmity that you might have towards others, where you really do bring it more towards observing the states and the qualities. So when you appreciate the good qualities of someone you don't like, it helps shift your attention and change your perspective, so that you're no longer thinking about this individual that you don't like, and you actually come to see the good and the bad, and you're able to see this actually isn't a person who is thoroughly evil, that they actually have good qualities. It's quite valuable in that way. The far enemy is jealousy and aversion, and this disliking that comes up when you see other people having things that you don't have. You can actually get to the point where you feel threatened by someone who is actually perhaps spiritually enlightened or superior, and you try to belittle them or pretend that they aren't what they actually are, that they haven't attained what they have attained. And the close enemy is what you have to watch out for and be careful not to give rise to when you're practicing mudita, is excitement, or the festive state, or the excited state. When you, perhaps friends of yours have gotten something good and you feel excited, you feel joyful, and there's liking arises. Right? The idea with all of these is that it fails when any kind of defilement arises. So it's not actually wholesome to be excited or attached or really pleased by the good things that perhaps your friends or your loved ones or your companions in the holy life attain. Of course, because this is caught up in liking and desire, and ultimately attachment and suffering. So again, the kind of thing to watch out for when you're practicing these things. The practice of equanimity, or the state of equanimity, is for the purpose of freeing you from all kinds of good and bad states. So attachment on the one side and aversion on the others. Any of the other three, they have these as their enemies. With equanimity, you have to be on the watch for both. So the idea, the thing to avoid, or the thing to confront and overcome with equanimity, is both sides of the coin, both the disliking and the liking. When you dislike certain people, or you like certain people, or when you're attached to someone, have expectations about other people, wish for them to be this way or that way, and have any kind of attachment. So actually equanimity is considered to be higher than the other three in this sense, in that it overcomes all of the qualities that the others are trying to overcome, but at the same time it actually surpasses the good qualities of all of them. With the practice of metta, karuna, and mudita, there is still generally a sense of joy and happiness. And this joy and happiness that comes when you're practicing it correctly isn't unwholesome, but it's considered more coarse than the subtlety of being equanimous. And so when it comes down to the technicality of the attainments, the practice of equanimity actually goes further. But that's the far enemy, or the real enemy of equanimity, is any kind of attachment or aversion on both sides. The near enemy, what you have to watch out for and avoid when you're cultivating equanimity, is indifference. So this isn't, when we talk about this kind of equanimity, as I said, it's not the equanimity towards formations, towards experiences. It's equanimity towards beings. But there's another kind of equanimity, which is equanimity based on ignorance, based on delusion, based on a mind that just isn't sharp enough to even care. So for example, seeing someone in suffering and not really being interested or concerned or having any sense that you have some responsibility to help them. Someone with equanimity, of course, can still help others, but they have no attachment when doing so. Just as with the other qualities, metta, karuna, mudita, one can help others, free them from suffering, and appreciate these things without any kind of attachment. It's still possible to do those things. With a certain type of equanimity, you're not even interested. You don't have a sense if someone is doing evil deeds. You don't have any sense that it's evil. If someone's doing good deeds, you don't have any sense that you should appreciate that. This is the equanimity of someone who has clouded mind, who just doesn't know any better than to help others or to appreciate others or that sort of thing. So equanimity is not always wholesome. Quite often it's unwholesome. And there are many kinds of equanimity that are just based on dullness and ignorance. And that's what these four are. That's the nature of the four Brahmaviharas. Now, in regards to what they are for, we have three ways to understand how these relate to the practice of the Buddha's teaching. The first is as actual practices themselves, independent of any other practice, where one might take this as one's main practice of meditation. We have practice as a supportive practice, as I've already alluded towards. And third, we have as outcomes of practice. And all three of these have a basis in the Buddha's teaching, so they can be undertaken not just in one way. There are three different ways of understanding, and perhaps three complementary ways of undertaking these, as I'll now explain. So the first way, in our tradition, we don't generally undertake, and that's as a practice of any of these as a main meditation practice. Of course, what we teach is the practice of mindfulness, and so undertaking any of these as a main practice would be a distraction or a roundabout path. It would take longer, it will require extra sort of instruction in terms of dealing with the pitfalls of that kind of practice. It's the practice of samatha meditation. And in that sense, the goal of the practice there becomes not any of these four qualities in and of themselves. So for example, you're not trying to be friendly for the sake of being a friendly person. You're not being compassionate for the sake of compassion, etc., etc. You're practicing all of these just as with any samatha practice for the purpose of tranquilizing the mind. So the ultimate goal is that any four of these is a state that is so wholesome and so pure that it can allow you to attain a state of tranquility, a state of absorption, where there doesn't arise any distraction of thought. So with these, in this way, with this kind of practice, you undertake it day in and day out, day and night, repeatedly undertaking the practice. And there are methods, if you want, you can look them up in so the Visuddhimagga, for example. There are modern books that have given instructions on how to practice these. But basically, you would start with someone who you love, someone who you have this quality towards already, and then work towards someone who you don't have this quality towards, and then finally work towards someone who you have the opposite quality, the enemy, right? When you have the feeling which is the enemy towards that person. In other words, if it's kindness, you have ill will towards them. If it's compassion, you have cruelty towards them. Find someone like that until ultimately you have the same quality of loving kindness, of friendliness, or so on, towards all beings. But there are detailed instructions on how to do that, going back and forth, and things to avoid, and pitfalls, and that sort of thing. This practice you can undertake in the perspective of the Buddha's teaching. You undertake this before practicing vipassana. So if you're interested, or if you feel the need to practice any of these, you would undertake to practice them maybe for weeks or months or years before moving on to practicing vipassana, which is the way of called Jeta Vimutti, where you practice samatha first and then go on to vipassana. The second way is the way that we probably more encourage people to undertake. So definitely in this tradition, this is how we apply these, is as a complementary practice or a supportive practice. Because at times, mindfulness isn't a great option when the emotions are high, or uh, when you're distracted from the practice or feeling discouraged in the practice based on the existence of any of these, the enemies of these, the qualities that these meditations are trying to overcome. So if you find yourself having ill will towards someone, then it's not that you should stop being mindful, but you might also include a daily or per session practice of friendliness. So before you practice mindfulness, you might take a few minutes to think of people first that you have love towards, and then moving on towards people who you have enmity towards. Sometimes we also practice at the end of a session, and this is more as a result of the practice. So, sorry, I'll talk about that in a second. But here, we're talking about it as a complementary practice. Any one of these can be undertaken. So, simple practices are just to wish for all beings to be happy. This is metta. Wish for all beings to be free from suffering. Wish for all beings to keep the things that they have gained, and expressing appreciation. Thinking of people who are enlightened and appreciating them, respecting the Buddha and the Arahants. Thinking of your companions and appreciating them. Thinking of the good qualities of the people around you, like the Buddha said. Even though they might have bad qualities, you don't focus on those. You throw those away in your mind. Discard them. Focus on the good qualities. It can really, of course, help to build harmony in the community if you do that. And equanimity, in terms of not being upset or attached to beings, make sure that you have a sense of equanimity and understanding that any being who suffers, because suffering is an inevitable part of life, that is just part of their path, part of their journey, and generally based on their good and bad deeds that they have done, so that you don't have this imbalance of judging people as better or worse, and you have more of an impartial state. All of these are supportive for the practice of mindfulness, and some might say essential for real progress and success, especially when living in a community with others where there might be conflicts and tensions that arise. Finally, just to mention that an important way to think of these four, which is kind of a means of appreciating the practice of mindfulness and vipassana, is that these four really, in their purest and truest form, are the product of the correct practice of the Buddha's teaching. As the Buddha said, it's a fruit of the holy life, a fruit of the practice which is correct, that one is able to practice these four. So a person struggling to practicing them in the beginning might be able to temporarily suppress or ignore or distract themselves from anger and aversion and greed and attachment for a time. But as soon as you stop practicing them, they come back, and it can often feel quite artificial and fake. However, a person who has practiced mindfulness, who has properly practiced vipassana, will find themselves naturally able to practice these, and you'll find it quite easy or easier to practice any of these four. More natural and more of a natural inclination to cultivate these four. Something easier and more like a second nature. Once you have practiced mindfulness, once you have cleared the mind and gained clarity and attained states of freedom from suffering. So these four are widely regarded as a staple of the practice of the Buddha's teaching. They should be understood in context, that none of them in and of themselves is enough, even if you take it as your main practice, that it's not enough that you have or cultivate these four things, but that for certain everyone will agree that these four are valuable, and some might say even essential for the path. Something for us as monastics, as meditators, as followers of the Buddha should be aware of and should engage in as appropriate. So that's the Dhamma for today.